Have you ever really looked inside your kitchen pantry? At that little jar of cloves or nutmeg? What if I told you that the story of modern capitalism, of global empires, and the mapping of our entire planet is sitting right there on your shelf? Well, let's get into it.
So, let's set the scene. The year is 1519. The explorer Ferdinand Magellan leaves Spain with 5 ships and a crew of 270 men. His mission? It's completely audacious. He wants to do something no one has ever done before, find a westward sea route to the legendary Spice Islands in Indonesia.
Okay, now fast forward 3 years. A single, wrecked ship barely limps back into a Spanish port. And on board, just 18 survivors. Magellan himself is dead. His crew had faced mutiny, starvation, disease, you name it, across 3 different oceans. By any measure, it was an absolute catastrophe.
And yet, here's the crazy part. The voyage was officially declared a massive financial success. Why? Well, because that one surviving ship was packed to the gills with cloves. The money they made from that single load of spice was enough to pay for all 5 of the original ships, the entire expedition, and still turn a huge profit. And that right there, that's the central question we're tackling.
How on earth did common kitchen spices become so valuable that they were worth more than shits, more than gold, and yes, even more than human lives?
To really get why all these wars were fought and empires were built, we first have to wrap our heads around an idea that sounds completely absurd to us today. Why were these simple spices something people were willing to die for?
Well, it really boiled down to 3 main things. First, preservation. You gotta remember, this was a world with no refrigerators. Spices were like a form of technology. Their antimicrobial properties meant food lasted longer. Second, they were medicine. Doctors at the time prescribed spices to balance out the body's 4 humors, which was the basis of their medical science. And third, maybe the biggest reason, was pure status. Serving food absolutely loaded with expensive spices was the ultimate flex. It was like pulling up to a party in a Bugatti. It screamed to your guests that you were incredibly rich and connected.
But the real thing that drove prices into the stratosphere was just how ridiculously rare they were. The most wanted spices, we're talking nutmeg, mace, and cloves, grew naturally in only one tiny spot on the entire globe, the Maluku Islands of Indonesia, what Europeans called the Spice Islands. For a couple of centuries, this small chain of islands was, without a doubt, the most valuable real estate on Earth.
Now, this created a huge problem for Europeans. They were stuck at the very end of this long and incredibly expensive supply chain. So they became obsessed with finding a way to cut out all the middlemen and go straight to the source. Just think about the journey a single clove had to take. It would start with farmers in the Maluku Islands, then it went to Malay traders, then to the massive port of Malacca. From there, Arab and Indian merchants would carry it across the Indian Ocean. Finally, it would be bought by traders from Venice and Genoa, who then sold it to the rest of Europe. And believe me, every single one of those people took a cut. By the time that clove got to a kitchen in London, its price had been marked up hundreds of times over.
This kicked off a frantic race. Portugal went east, battling their way around Africa. Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498, and by 1512, the Portuguese had muscled their way to the Spice Islands themselves. Now this totally terrified their biggest rival, Spain. So Spain decided to fund Magellan's insane idea to find a western route, and that's what led to that historic and tragic first trip all the way around the world.
So, for almost a century, Portugal was the king of the hill, but that wasn't going to last. A new power showed up on the scene, one that was more organized, more systematic, and frankly, a whole lot more ruthless. The Dutch had arrived, and they were about to change the entire game. In 1602, the Dutch created something the world had never seen before, the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company. Now, this was not just another trading company. This was the world's first multinational corporation, and the Dutch government had given it the power to act like its own nation. The VOC could raise an army, build a navy, wage war, and sign treaties, all in the name of making a profit.
The VOC immediately set its sights on the crown jewel of the spice trade, the Banda Islands. This was the only place on the planet you could get nutmeg and mace. Now, the Bandanese people had been trading with everyone for centuries, and they had zero interest in giving the Dutch an exclusive monopoly. The VOC decided that was simply unacceptable.
What happened next was nothing short of a corporate-sponsored genocide. In 1621, the VOC invaded and systematically depopulated the islands. Through massacres, starvation, and enslavement, a population of about 15,000 people was reduced to just 1,000. The Banda Islands were turned into a giant, private, forced labor plantation for the VOC's shareholders.
And if you want to know just how obsessed they were with nutmeg, get this. For years, the Dutch and the English fought over a tiny little rock called Run Island. In 1667, they finally struck a deal. England gave up its claim to Run Island. In return, the Dutch gave England a swampy, remote trading post they had in North America, an island called Manhattan. That's right. And at the time, the Dutch thought they had gotten the better end of that deal by a mile.
This brutal monopoly lasted for over 150 years. But it wasn't an army or a treaty that brought it down in the end. It was something much smaller. A single seed and a brilliant act of industrial espionage. A Frenchman named Pierre Poivre, and you can't make this up, his name literally translates to Peter Pepper, managed to do what no one else could. In 1770, his agents secretly smuggled live nutmeg and cloves seedlings out of Dutch territory. They planted them in French colonies, and soon spice trees were growing all over the world. The monopoly was broken, prices collapsed, and spices became the cheap commodity we know today.
But the legacy of this obsession is just staggering. The Spice Wars gave us the blueprint for the modern corporation and the very first stock exchange. They fueled the age of exploration that mapped our planet. They forged massive colonial empires and completely changed what we eat. And all of it came at an enormous, brutal cost to the people of Indonesia.
So the next time you reach for that jar of nutmeg, take a second and look at it. It's not just a flavor, it's an artifact. It's a piece of a violent, revolutionary, world-changing history. A history that much of the world has forgotten, but that Indonesia never could.